Hopefully that's nice. Let me see here. The technician's coming back just to put a 4-point here, but you're okay to set up over here if you need to.
But I don't need my camera and battery.
That's fine. I don't know about mine, so I just don't want to be using it. Power pack. You never know when you need one. The great people will be wondering how that goes. The ones who used to do the media events. Do you have to manage it or? Let me check on involved. It was the previous people. Me and Jim had a meeting. That's so fun. It's supposed to be on YouTube Live right now. Really? And you're on ISO page. You go to YouTube and just check ISO.
So you're right now on the page.
It's right now streaming.
Alright, lovely.
So I'll keep this here. People know that it's me. This is me.
And it's open, but it comes through the page, and you just click
Good to see you. Maybe still the band?
Where did Jim?
I'm turning it on now. Alright. Let me see how that sounds. Yeah, that's your voice. You were saying, yeah, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, that's perfect. Excellent. It's a unidirectional. Don't want to stop it.
एक टाइम में मेरा माइंड बन रहा था इसलिए मैंने
It's on streaming live on YouTube right now. It's actually picking up our conversation as we stop talking.
I'm just trying to
Why
Hamza, Jibril, can we put this, please? This thing. What's wrong with you? You have to pick it up. Joe. Where is Joe? Joe. We will start with your times. I think you probably should start there. Watch it from there. Can I ask everybody to take their seats, please? Victoria, can you sit 5 minutes here? 5 minutes here. Just for 5 minutes. With Professor Shaw. Can I ask everybody, please take the seats? Muzammil, Tahir, Yani Saab, Zubair. You can bring the coffees and keys and everything on the table, sir, please.
I was trying to check it now. Sorry. They said that it's a health and safety hazard, so keep it between the chairs.
Thank you very much to all of you.
Sorry about this.
Before I will hand it over to Victoria Schofield to chair the entire proceedings this afternoon, we have just a 3 minutes video, no more than that, just 3 minutes. And we will commence the proceedings with that video. Please, sir. Thank you. But it's actually on Human Rights Day.
Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, Chair of the Drafting Committee of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, succinctly stated,
"Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen actions to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world."
This year, Human Rights Day kicks off a year-long campaign to mark the upcoming 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a milestone document that proclaims the inalienable rights which everyone is inherently entitled to as a human being. 70th anniversary of UDHR is a progress to look at various conflicts around the globe and to ask ourselves if human beings' human rights are preserved. Point in time is the human rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Professor Nazir Ahmed Shaw, a renowned Kashmiri poet, in his poem on Kashmir, writes,
I see once again those limpid lakes fed by her tinkling streams, which from sparkling streams flow within melodies sublime. Her wondrous stately trees in lush forests, majestic, serene, that march along her steep hill slopes and climb under a radiant sun to meet the bluest sky.
Alas, the ravaging conflict has transformed this paradise, imprisoned, tormented, and bruised. This echo of Professor Shaw tells the whole story.
Yet round her peaks and down her valleys bare, wild storms do lash and maim. In autumnal's furies rage, inflicting bruises, damage, daily pain. At the criminal's behest, there pray her people, do lie in bondage low, struggling in misery, dying to escape the captor's blow.
There is no peace and justice in Kashmir. On this 70th anniversary, Kashmiris deserve the United Nations' attention.
That's it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Victoria Schofield, and I'm delighted to be chairing this session. I'd like to thank Barrister Majid Trambu and all the organisation for getting together such a group of panellists and indeed audience. I mean, for those of you who might have struggled with the rain today, thank you also for coming. I think we've got others who are arriving. I think today is very important. We're all here because we do care about human rights, and that's what gives us the commonality as human beings. And so I think it's very important that we are thinking about human rights, particularly in relation to the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. So I'd like now to ask Barrister Majid Trambu to give the opening remarks. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Are you done, sir, please? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I once again thank you, all of you, for being here on this very important occasion. We have gathered here primarily to celebrate the 70th anniversary of signing of the Human Rights Declaration for Human Rights. It's a very important and crucial document, as you have seen itself in the documentary. Whether this document has delivered over the years, over the last 70 years, of course we will see during the course of this roundtable in this room. Human rights are or must continue to be the heart of the United Nations and its charter. This is what we have as human rights activists campaigned for over the years within the United Nations walls, whether it was or whether it is in Geneva or in New York, whether it's General Assembly, Security Council, or Office of the High Commissioner, or for that matter, Human Rights Council. Without advocacy for human rights, I believe we cannot succeed. We have to advocate human rights. Generally, the UN can only succeed if it promotes and protects human rights. Undoubtedly, and I have no doubt in my mind, I have been working in this field more than 35 years. And I can say it with certainty, both as a lawyer and as an advocate of human rights, that from the United Nations point of view, it has placed solid mechanisms in place. But whether those mechanisms are working, that is what is the big question. If you will go to United Nations, you will see there are a host of special rapporteurs on all sorts of human rights abuses, whether it is torture, whether it's women's rights, whether it's children's rights, whether it's minority rights, whether it's indigenous people, unrepresented people. You have the special rapporteurs, you have the working groups, you have the Human Rights Committee, which investigates the human rights abuses which are reported to that committee. And overall now, the new Human Rights Council introduced what we call Universal Periodic Reviews, which is UPR of each country in a circle of 5 years. So these are mechanisms, those have been put in place by the United Nations. But how far it is successful, that is what is important. My view is that 70 years on, regrettably, unfortunately, use all sorts of adjectives, the human rights protection is not working overall when you look around the globe. There are human rights abuses, there are human rights gross violations in various parts of the world. I don't think that I need to exemplify them. You are very much aware of what's happening where in the world. But close to my heart is, of course, those governments which feel threatened of their sovereignty when we talk of the self-determination. And one of those governments is of my country, which is being occupied, is Government of India, which perpetrates massive human rights abuses, particularly against those who are engaged in seeking what commonly known is referendum, or legally is self-determination, to meet their political, social, and economic rights. But yet, those people are termed as terrorists. Of course, we have over the years reported that there are mass graves and unknown graves in Kashmir. The government based in Srinagar, and which is endorsed by the Indian Home Ministry, is that there are 10,000 disappeared people. It's an admitted fact. And it's our belief that those 10,000 people are in those graves, but yet there is no investigation. Frank Shulbahoth is here. He has worked with us at the European Parliament in Brussels, and that Parliament passed a massive resolution on mass graves and unknown graves, and asked Government of India to investigate at least the families of those people who are disappeared, have some peace to know that their loved ones have been killed or are buried in those graves. Nothing has happened. Then there's another grave, very grave situation, and that's what we call Konan Poshpora, rape situation. where 5-year-old girl to 80-year-old woman was raped by the Indian Rashtriya Rifles over one night episode. We can't forget that. No investigation yet. We have been working on this. I know it for a fact. The Office of the High Commissioner under Pillay wrote to the Indian government to investigate this gang rape, mass rape, to investigate the unknown graves. She went actually there in India, and before going to India, I met her, just for 5 minutes, standing in the corridors of Palais de Nation, and I gave her the mass graves material in her hand. And the only reference on when she was there, she made to that document and asked Government of India, the least they can do is to investigate these mass graves. And then there is a recent episode, and that is, of course, the pellet guns. Most of you probably are known to that. Young people who have suffered massive tragedies because of the pellet guns. They are either blinded or maimed or even killed. So these are the tragedies that Kashmir is facing, and it certainly needs a grave attention on this Human Rights Day, which is the 70th anniversary. Well, what I ask here today, from this round table, the message to go out, is stand up for Kashmiris and stand up for their human rights. That is the total sum up of this round table. And we need to ensure that that message goes clearly out from this round table today. We also want to take the opportunity, as the hosts, that is ICHR and SECFR, Professor Shaw is sitting there, who will address to you in a minute or so, that we had a very good conference in September 2017 this year, and many of you were present in that conference, which was International Media Conference, and we had declared there that we will form a working group on international media on Kashmir. And we have been working since then on it. The purpose is, I think it may be better explained by Victoria Schofield later. The purpose is basically to keep an eye on the situation, what's happening in Kashmir. And we would be declaring the initial members of the conference, of this working group, during the course of the conference. We're waiting for 1 or 2 people to come and their consent on the group, and we will formally announce the working group, formation of the working group on international media on Kashmir. So, to conclude, it is that on this 70th anniversary of UDHR, please do not forget Kashmir, do not forget their human rights, and do not forget their right to self-determination. I thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barrister Trumbull. We are trying to keep to time today so that there is indeed time for questions. And while we were listening to the speakers, perhaps you will also be thinking about your questions, because our experience with such roundtables is that we do want to have it as a roundtable so that it's interactive, and that those people who have got questions they want to ask have the opportunity. It's now with great pleasure I'm going to ask Dr. Shaw to make the concluding remarks of this opening session. I'm not giving you biographies of our speakers because they're up on the screen and they're also within your folders. Thank you, Dr. Shaw.
Esteemed Chairperson, Chairman ICHR, distinguished distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This roundtable that is being organized here today by International Commission for Human Rights and South Asia Center for Peace and Human Rights in connection with International Human Rights Day that falls on 10 December. It has been rightly remarked, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was a shout across the world stating loud and clear that no matter where we live, what we believe, or how we live, we are each individually deserving of the most basic fundamentals of human needs. Every year, Human Rights Day marks conferences around the world dedicated to ensuring that these ideals are pursued and human rights of every person is made a priority in the global theater. I was going through some of the materials on human rights and I discovered that in 1789, the French Declaration of the Human Rights, French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, said a wonderful thing, and it was that ignorance, neglect, or the contempt of the rights of man are the sole causes of public misfortunes. There are, as has been already pointed out by my friend Barrister Trumbo, there are a lot of lingering international conflicts. There is blood spilling going on in different parts of the world. We come across these realities. These are the objective realities of the existing world. It was really one of the momentous events in the history of man, or in the history of the world, when the collective wisdom of the world decided to have a platform in the shape of United Nations. But having a look at the United Nations, having a look at the United Nations Charter, having a look at the different times there have been different declarations, still we find that the human rights violations persist. In spite of the declaration, in the Charter of the United Nations, we declared we are determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. One of the most momentous decisions in the history of United Nations was when the resolution on decolonization was passed. And if you find more than 150 countries of the world as member states of the United Nations, it is the consequence of that declaration. But there are certain people who remained deprived, who remained what we call without power, without rights. And in fact, we the Kashmiris, particularly the Kashmiris, as has been pointed out already by my friend Barrister Trumbo, we are humans, but we are humans without human rights in the state of, Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, ruled by, occupied by the Indian troops. But one thing I would like to make it clear, that in spite of the chill of the human rights violations, in spite of the blood spilling, Kashmiris have demonstrated and are demonstrating resilience against occupation. As has been pointed out, we recently saw in the post-Burhan phase of the Kashmir freedom movement, we saw that pellets and bullets were used indiscriminately and there was disproportionate use of force. We definitely hoped that the international conscience would take a notice of this courage, of these gross violations of human rights. Now, I will not take much of your time, as already Victoria Schofield has made this point that we want an interactive dialogue with all the distinguished guests. Therefore, I will reduce my presentation, but still I need to say that there is a need for international solidarity with the people of Jammu and Kashmir towards just peace. The seeds of peace must be planted in a truly just solution, which names the denial of rights, takes cognizance of unethical use of pellet guns, resulting in blinding of Kashmiri youth by Indian troops, and recognizes the right of the people of Jammu and Kashmir to freely determine their political future. Despite the High Commissioner for Human Rights' public demand for allowing access to an independent fact-finding mission to visit both sides of ceasefire line, the request has been denied by India and accepted by Pakistan. The avoidance of such a neutral body speaks volumes about the atrocities that India intends to hide. Let the world realize that Kashmiris are humans and they too be given their basic rights. In the recent times, particularly in the post-Burhan phase since July 2016, rapine and slaughter were visited in Kashmir, which are unmatched in the chronicles of local tyranny, and indeed were unimaginable before. Besides ravaging the population, the unreserved aggression has taken the psychic toll as well. It has to be accepted that the issue of the right of Kashmiri people to self-determination is not in need of any discussion or debate. In so much, it is in need of work to end obstacles and hindrances which stand in the way of implementing international legitimacy, thereby paving the way for the people of Kashmir to exercise their long-awaited right of self-determination. I would end with two of my verses. Free at last from despot's hand, free to sing the song of freedom, proclaiming the destined course awaiting them to rewrite their destiny, free on their home soil to stand. So rise again, Kashmir, my motherland. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shaw. We do now have some time for questions before we begin the next session. So perhaps you'd like to say, I know we all know each other, but some of us may not know each other, so perhaps you'd like to say who you are.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Councillor Aslam Khan from Luton Borough Council. I'm a professional and also a councillor, and one of the reasons I got into politics was I believed in justice, fairness and equality both in this country and globally. When I look at this booklet, there's some big names with a lot of experience and a lot of networking, and when I put my professional lens on, it frustrates me that having a group like this, we haven't made much progress in terms of highlighting the gross human rights violations, and we haven't really been able to engage the movers and the shakers and the influencers which may exist in this country and globally. And when I put my sort of councillor hat on, and when I look at the stance of many Western countries, and when we put money before lives, it really shocks me that we continue being silent. My question is, from both aspects, what do you think are the barriers, and how could we collectively overcome those?
Thank you. Barriers and how we can collectively overcome them. I'll just take a couple more questions and then I'll ask Soraya.
First of all, good afternoon and salam alaikum everyone. And my question is in relation to the use of pellet guns. May I just take a moment just to say that I'd like to draw a parallel in regards to what Israel has done in Palestine by using pellet guns. And I think from the point of view of ensuring that a population is completely rendered helpless and submit, frightening people by maiming them visually, etc., is quite a deterrent. What are your views on that and the similarities in terms of the use of pellet guns? Thank you.
Okay, fine. Views on pellet guns. And one last question before we ask for some responses. None at the moment. Barrister Trumbull, would you like to talk about the barriers and indeed pellet guns?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor. I think I couldn't agree with you more. There is a particular situation in the Western world that these governments are silent on Kashmir. I have worked intensively in Europe on the Kashmir issue, and Frank is here. I think he will relate some of the work that was done in Europe, particularly in the European Parliament. I think we have succeeded between 2003 to 2013 in highlighting Kashmir considerably within Europe and within UK. But yes, I would say the present scenario is somewhat gloomy, but that's the reason that we Kashmiris are getting together again, and with your help and with lots of NGOs and think tanks within the United Kingdom and Europe, and MPs and MEPs, we believe that we will be able to revive at the moment on Kashmir. That goes for that, and as to pellet guns, yes, Soraya, you are absolutely right. The similarity that you can say on pellet guns is that regrettably and unfortunately, the pellet guns concept came to Kashmir from Israel. And there was a team of Israeli intelligence in Kashmir some 3 years back, and it was what we call the Doble Doctrine. He invited them, who is the National Security Advisor to the present Prime Minister of India, Modi, and the pellet guns was introduced on this basis in Kashmir. It is horrendous that whether it is used on Palestinians or on Kashmiris. I think generally and overall, we believe it's a very tragic human rights abuse, and it doesn't only kill, but if you are not killed, you are definitely blinded and you are definitely maimed. So we should, at all levels, condemn the use of pellet guns anywhere in the world.
Do you want to make any comments?
I would just, I think our questions have been answered, but still I would like to...
We've got one more question here, then we must move on, and perhaps you'll answer this question.
Yeah,
yes.
My name is Councillor Wahid Akbar from Luton. This question is actually from frustration which we have been actually observing for the last 20 years. And one question is why the Kashmiri community has great potential in this country, why we have not been able to actually utilize that potential. And the other question is, you are all learned people here, including Barrister Majid Rambo. I met him first, I think, in 1995, and similar conferences we have several held. And why we have not actually taken this case to International Court of Justice?
Do you want that question, Dr. Shaw?
I think Mr. Wahid Akbar has pointed out rightly that in spite of a vibrant and massive diaspora, we have not been able to make an impact in the corridors of policy making. One of the reasons for this is that many egos of people have been at work, and different, what we call different personal likes and dislikes have come in the way of forging a principle-based unity, and that unity would definitely, the convergence of different opinions into a single opinion could have definitely helped to achieve our target. That's number one. As far as the other question is concerned, we as individuals cannot take it to ICJ. In International Court of Justice, only the states can approach ICJ, and that's the reason why it has not been debated. Even I will come. Even the people who are supposed to be the advocates of our cause, even they have not been able to take it to ICJ. And fundamentally, the question is that there are UN Security Council resolutions on the subject which have remained what we call unimplemented so far. So if anything has to happen, it has to happen at the level of United Nations Security Council.
Thank you very much.
Just one supplementary question about, who took this case for East Timor in the ICJ?
Australia.
Yes.
Okay.
Can't persuade any of these countries.
Well, I think this will form part of our discussions, I think, throughout the days in terms of what the barriers are and how we can move forward. So I'd like to thank both Barrister Majid Trambu and indeed Professor Azir Shaul for their opening remarks for this session, and I'm going to end this session and then invite the speakers for the next session to come forward and take places on the panel. You may get up and go and get cups of coffee and come back to your seats again if you want to stretch your legs during the session. Thank you. Oh, okay, fine. We're not. So, right, we're actually just going straight on, and we're not bringing our speakers up to the panel. The next session, we have 4 speakers, and so I'd like to ask firstly Frank Schwab, former MP and founding member of German Greens. Would you come up and speak? Thank you.
Vis-a-vis, please fill in your coffee or your tea or your fruit.
And also, could you please make sure your mobile phones are off? I should have mentioned that beforehand, but just so we don't have any mobile phones going off. Thank you. Thank you, Frank.
Hungry and thirsty guests who are still there at the food table. Can you please come back to your seats?
Mumtaz,
hello.
Frank is
Seats.
asking you to sit down, please.
You see, in this life I was an officer, and uncle was general, you feel it, yeah? Now, I have to admit, I'm very astonished. I'm very astonished of the student generation of Kashmiris. Why is there not a PhD student who has done his doctoral thesis on Kashmir politics in Brussels? Because this was the success story. I entered the European Parliament in 1984. I invited Arafat to come to the Parliament. I drafted the resolution to acknowledge that there was an Armenian genocide. And during 20 years, up to 2003, or 19 years exactly, there was one single Kashmir event in the parliament. And then in 2003, everything changed. The guy who's playing with his mobile phone, Majid, came, a lot of other Kashmiris, and suddenly Kashmiri went up on the ladder of importance. For you, Kashmir is important, okay. But there is a very strong competition. There are other conflicts where the international community is looking at or is asked to intervene, not only Palestine. Not only Somalia, Burundi, Myanmar, Central African Republic, Iraq. There are a lot of Qatar, there are a lot of conflicts. And what was achieved in Brussels was the following: to bring Kashmir higher on the political agenda. Resolutions, delegations, people from Europe visiting the two sides, reports mentioning of human rights violations in the annual human rights report. This was even to the degree that apparently Indian security forces broke in the office, stole the hard disks, the computers, were chased by the police, were arrested. These have been people from Sicily, from the mafia, who had been paid by an outside force. That means it was very, very annoying for one side, but it was incredibly effective. And I think it was a disaster that Kashmiri activities some 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, stopped in Brussels. Since then there are some small activities, but they're not effective, they're not efficient, and they don't have an effect on actual policy of the European Union, and it's even worse. As you, in your wisdom, you Brits, have decided to leave the European Union, it's even becoming worse. Because most of the activities in Brussels were done by British people, or people linked to the UK. Therefore, I'm not very confident that the European Union will continue with the interest, and there has to be new oxygen in the efforts to bring the European Union, to show the European Union what is happening in Kashmir and to involve them in the fight for what we've heard before. Because Brussels, for most of you, as you are living on an island, you think it's something economic, it's bureaucratic. No, it is a resonance board, like on a guitar, violin, a resonance board for activities. I've been visited in my life 82 different parliaments. Not a single parliament gives so many possibilities for outside ideas, outside people to use the European Parliament as a resonance board. The question of today is not only Kashmir, the question is making peaceful resolution of conflicts around the world possible, including Kashmir. As I'm one of the co-founders of the German Greens, my contribution was to bring into the political priorities of the Greens human rights, rule of law, and good governance. And therefore, over the years, and I'm now since 33 years in Brussels, I reflected, how is it possible to bring peace? And I think there are some key elements. The first is to contain the conflict. Because if you have a conflict, there is no certainty that it will stay at this level. It's always a danger that it become more. And you know, we all know, on the two sides, there are nuclear weapons. And if we look on Israel-Palestine, I don't think that among us there will ever be peace. The aim has to be to contain the conflict, to avoid something worse. First element always on this question is to contain the conflict. The second is to understand not only their own position, that's easy, but to understand the position of the other side as well. It's very difficult, because you're full of anger, you're full of all of these feelings, but it is necessary in a conflict. Either, poof, you kill the other side to eliminate the other side. That's okay. It's not very moral, it's not very humane, and we Germans have the negative experience that it's not even morally good. Think of the Holocaust. But if you don't want to eliminate the other side, you have to try to understand the other side. And the incredible thing is, we have learned all our life that there is the truth. The truth. I have my doubts. I think sometimes, or even very often, there are plural, they don't exist grammatically. There are different truths, and it's necessary to understand, not to accept, but in a certain way to respect that there might be another truth. Third element is, and this is the same, when you're married and you have a conflict and you think divorce yes or no, there are counselors, counseling. In politics it's called mediation. Very often it is necessary, if there's an international conflict, to have a mediation, like Kuwait for Qatar, like what Majid tried, but it was not enough time to achieve it, that the EU would be an honest broker in the Kashmir conflict. But the EU at that time was not so keen on it, and the times are becoming ripe and riper, you don't say riper, but more ripe, that the EU might be tempted to act as an honest broker in this conflict. To contain, to understand, to have mediation, and fourth is confidence-building measures. Your experience, this happened, but it's confidence-building measures in Kashmir is a very small plant, not yet a bush or a tree. Confidence-building measures are a necessary element. Next, two others still. One is education. It's very difficult to educate people. When you have children, you know it. It's very difficult for a state system to educate the citizen. But education starting in school, and for example, take an example from Germany and Poland, we always have been conflict. There are now school books where German and Polish historians have worked together on positions who were like this to find the wording in the school books. It's very difficult to imagine that there would be Pakistani and Indian historians work on a textbook which would be used in the two countries. Short-term and possible mid-term, possibly some elements, but I think education is important. And the very last is, and this I learned in Brussels, is to compromise. The worst thing which I can say to a politician in Bonn, in Berlin, in Rome, in Paris, in London is, you're making always compromise. You consider this as an insult. In Brussels, if you want to make a compliment to a political leader, you say, you make always compromise. He will answer, oh, thank you very much. That is really a nice compliment. Because in Brussels we have learned that compromise is not something bad. If you don't want to impose military, economically, or physically killing the other person, you have to look for a compromise. And that is very, very difficult to achieve in your own heart, because you know you're right, The terrible thing, the other side thinks they are right as well. You have weapons, you have arguments, the other side has arguments and weapons as well. Therefore, I think it is necessary to involve these elements and to be active in Geneva, Human Rights Council, in the United Nations, in London. You are now, in 1.5 years, thank you very much, totally independent country, and in Brussels, because only a concerted action in all these international fora can guarantee that people still have an interest and then a knowledge on Kashmir and are prepared to assist in making the situation a little bit and much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank, very much indeed. I think your points contain, understand, mediation, confidence-building measures, education, and finally compromise are very well said at this present moment in time. It's now with great pleasure I'm going to ask Soraya Boyd to come up and speak. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Facilitate Global. Thank you, Soraya.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Salam alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be able to stand here before you and thank the conference organizers for this very timely, indeed, event. So, before I proceed with my talk, I'd like to give you a friendly word of warning. I'm going to frame it within the current international political structure. So, but the preamble to this is this particular quote, which I really love. And it goes something like this. If the force of arms is considered the only means of authority, it is not an auspicious instrument. So I won't ask you to tell me who said that. So I now proceed. It was Lao Tzu. I think there's great truth in that statement, and it seems that through our evolution, we've tended to favour warfare rather than conflict prevention, let alone conflict resolution. So today we are here gathered to talk about making peaceful resolutions of conflicts around the world. And indeed there are many conflicts, as my esteemed colleagues have mentioned here. But let me just start with America's rapprochement, both in terms of defense, security, military, bilateral trade with India. And of course, in my view, that is in regard to the greater consolidation of power, very helpful in the sense that it consolidates very nicely the American, Indian, Israeli platform. So that's also been a very intended consequence of pushing away from the former ally in the so-called war on terror. So India seems to be favoured and has been favoured, whereas Pakistan, unfortunately, has been relegated to no longer being a very esteemed friend of the Americans. So I think that needs to be said. And also, the US military presence in the region is a very great destabilizing factor. Not just in the current madness with regard to North Korea, because obviously it could be regarded as a proxy war with China. It's a question. But this ongoing provocation of the American administration is not auguring well. And we all know that if the Americans were to go forth with a preemptive strike, the North Korean leadership could equally retaliate. But that's a no-gamer, because I think Trump at this UN recent speech did mention the fact that he would not only change the regime, he would obliterate an entire people and nation. So that's a little bit frightening. The current Trump's declaration with regard to Jerusalem is also a sign of consolidating the emergence of some sort of coherence with regard to the US moving away from global commons, pulling out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the UN 2016 Leaders Summit on Refugees, and that's also creating greater instability in the whole world. So this US unilateral isolationist, protectionist, nationalist sort of stance of the current times are very much telling. But perhaps we could just look at the Jerusalem Declaration and think that maybe there was a bit of a cynical sign just to perhaps shore up a beleaguered Netanyahu, who is currently being investigated on charges of corruption. And you may know that there have been quite a number of people who have protested recently. So, democracy, human rights on the defensive, very much so. And journalists, activists, and civil society, basically everybody's become a target, because due process is not something that is adhered to by states, and we see it in every nation, and it gets in the way of state business in terms of national security, national interest, etc. So, what of civil society? Well, civil society has a very important role to play, and is to speak truth to power, and to endeavour, as best as possible, to uphold governments for the sake of accountability and transparency, and to put in the public domain, as a matter of public interest, information that is formally not accessible to the public. I come from France, and recently President Emmanuel Macron went to Africa, and he did the right thing. He apologized for all of the war crimes, crimes against humanity committed against people in Africa, whatever the country. And he did say that colonialism equates with war crime, and he did say also that it's contrary to international law. So if he has the courage and the moral fiber to stand there before everyone and say, I'm sorry, what of Theresa May? Will she say the same to Palestinians? What about Modi? Will he say the same to people in Kashmir? As long as we have no political courage, there will be no political will. And so it would be a little bit more of the same, as Einstein said. We keep doing the same thing and end up with the same result. If that's not a form of madness, then possibly we can ask ourselves the question, what is? So the ICJ also recognized that self-determination is a right under the control of the people. And that right is under the control of Kashmiris, as it is under the control of Palestinians, and indeed every other people who are struggling to self-determine. The UN has been constantly undermined either through veto or abstention, or in the case of Trump, forcing a unilateralist sort of imposition, domination on every other country, by saying that even though what the Americans want to impose now on North Korea hasn't been agreed at the UN, etc., everybody has got to do the bidding of America, pander to the Americans. Moreover, according to international law, the UN is absolutely entitled to demand unfettered access, but very much like Israel, through all of its military occupation in Gaza, there has been no access. So that's, again, in regard to the UN Security Council, not exactly in line with promoting international peace and security. And I'd like to also mention the fact that international criminal law, from a point of view of responsibility, is not just limited to the people who go and commit vile acts. It's also very much something that concerns everybody along the line in terms of the chain of command. So it's, no one is exempt from that point of view. Perhaps India's unwillingness to sign and ratify the Rome Statutes of the ICC is telling. But the UN Security Council, under Article 13b, is obliged to fulfill the mandated obligation that it is there to uphold, and that is to promote and ensure international peace and security. And so therefore that's something that the UN Security Council has to continually strive to realize. In 2014, the Jammu and Kashmir Human Rights Commission issued a report. It's full of evidence, full of facts that cannot be disputed. So the ICC, the ICJ, everybody ought to be able to read through that, because from a legal perspective, that's evidence. So therefore, it should be used in terms of prosecutions. My colleagues mentioned Kunan Pushpora. If you haven't got to read this yet, may I recommend that you acquire this book. It also is very much, well, it's full of facts, but it makes very grim reading. But nonetheless, I think it should be on everybody's reading list. So, when it comes to the international dynamics, whether we look at what's going on currently in regards to Bahrain, Yemen, Sudan, which is very seldom mentioned now, whether we go to further afield, wherever, there is indeed a huge corpus of evidence which points to the fact that human rights and democracy, so-called, are very much in the crosshairs of every government, because they're inconvenient, they get in the way of state business, and they can be costly and embarrassing. But never mind about the loss of lives, That's, as they say, collateral damage, a very, very unfortunate euphemism. I think we need to move away from the idea of warfare and the promotion of warfare, the promotion of militarism, the promotion of the fact that it's normal. It is completely abnormal to kill each other off. So when we're looking at genocide, I think we've been doing that to each other ever since we've been evolving. So there isn't one genocide that takes precedent over another. And it's not a matter of numbers, it's a matter of principle. I think we should favour a very simple yet very powerful principle: non-violence. Non-violence is a dangerous idea. Protesting non-violently is something that was really evidenced by Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and many, known and unknown. But because it's such a potent and powerful idea, that's probably something that might lead us to us saving ourselves from ourselves, which is to move away from the sense that killing another, taking another's life, is acceptable. Because throughout pronouncements of whatever religious tenets we are looking at, and I'm not making this a religious thing, it says, do not kill. Basic, simple, do not kill. And life is sacred indeed. My life, everybody's life. So we should really move towards the sanctity of the breath from which we all draw, and look upon each other as having something far more in common. As far as I know, there's only one race, and that is the human race. The rest is ethnicity, culture, and language. And coming from Lorraine, which is northeast France, we were first of all invaded by Bismarck, which inspired Adolf Hitler. And my region knows a thing or two about occupation. My region knows a thing or two about resistance. And our fighters, I'm a bit too young for that, but if I were under similar circumstances, I know where I would stand. I know that I would do absolutely everything that I could and would to afford a means of resisting a belligerent occupier. Palestinians are doing it, Kashmiris are doing it. Even Stefan Hessel, who is a celebrated concentration camp survivor, French resistant fighter, who wrote a marvellous book, Time for Outrage, in French, Indignez-vous. I'd like to leave you with this. If we continue to do the same thing, I'm getting really quite sorry. Okay. I'll do it again. If you continue to do the same thing, we can't expect different results. However, it is not because things are difficult that we dare not do or act. It is because we dare not act that things are difficult. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Soraya. You said so much in your presentation, which is food for thought. I will just repeat the comment you made. As long as we have no political courage, there will be no political will. And I think that is something that we'll take home with us today. It's now with pleasure I'm going to ask Mohammed Altaf Khan, Liberal Sheriff and Liberal Democratic Shadow Spokesperson for Culture and Communities. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I come from Oxford and a British Kashmiri. I can say that my city has produced a document which is the very most known in 20th century's Oxford Manifesto. In 1947, the international liberal from the dozen countries gathered in Oxford and laid the ground for the UN Declaration for Human Rights. A document was adopted a year later in 1948. And last year I served as a Lord Mayor, and I was very delighted to receive these dozens of international liberals back again after 70 years to the same step where they stood 70 years ago and produced this document which was adopted by the United Nations. Today we are at the crossroad facing the new waves of authoritarianism and a dangerous populism. Talking to Kashmir and the conflicts, rather than the mover and shakers or the peacemakers making a resolution for a peace in conflict zone, they are making a further actually conflicting remarks and talks which are not welcomed, and it will be further killing of innocent people, whether it is in Palestine, Myanmar or Kashmir. I originally come from Kashmir, and my family still is in Kashmir, and we know what happened on the control line side. What we can do here as a local British citizen of the United Kingdom, in my city we had about 2,000 petitions asking 2 parliamentarians, MEPs and MPs to take this matter to international levels. Those 2,000 petitioners were not the British Kashmiris or Pakistani, they were the citizens of Oxford. So all citizens signed the petition. We in a council also displayed these human rights declarations with a proud, but when it comes to the international issues, often our parliaments are silent or speaking in a very diplomatic language where we are not getting anywhere. In Myanmar situation, we haven't heard much or strong statements from the parliaments here or the European parliaments. In our city, Aung San Suu Kyi was the student of Oxford. She was given a freedom of the city, but we removed that through a cross-party motion. And it was just done about a couple of weeks ago. She has no longer that right of freedom of the city, and her portrait has also been removed by Oxford University. Is that enough to solve the problems we are facing or what we've been told? I would say no. These are the only, some of the things as ordinary citizens we could do. I always feel very strongly for those British Kashmiris living here, with them. Councillor Wahid is here, not far from my place, originally where we come from the control line area, where the firing happens from the both sides and the Kashmiris are killed from the both sides. And those people who were born and died without being recognized their existence on this planet, in this one world we talk about. They were not even on a registered as a birth and not even as a dead on a registered. So there are those hundreds and thousands of people in the remote area of Kashmir. What we talked earlier, there was a question about the ECJ. I visited this side of Kashmir in Pakistan last year and talked with the lawyer chamber, and I did ask them that on this side of the control line, the killing of the innocent people, whether it's a fire from this side or the other side, there got to be a FIR, a report to the police station, to if it's from the other side, to the Indian government. Against a FIR should be against the Indian government, and there's got to be a record of that. With those number of FIR, if they are registered, then either the Azad Kashmir or the Pakistan should take this case to the ECJ and show the numbers of being killed over years and the months. So as already been said, that only the state can take to the ECJ, but I am not sure whether the Azad Kashmir has got that power to take it, but if they don't, because they don't have the foreign office and foreign spokesman, so then Pakistan should take this to the ECJ. Brexit will also affect us as a British Kashmiris, because our voice will not be heard in the EU, and as we already heard about the EU contribution towards the resolution issue of Kashmir. Another point I would like to address is the talks on the both sides of the Kashmir. Other side, we know Abdullah family have ruled since last 50 years. Omar Abdullah, one of the former chief minister and at the moment is the opposition leader, came to Oxford University a couple of weeks ago and gave a talk where he says the Kashmir cannot live without military. So on that other side, the Kashmiri leader is asking to have more military on that side because he thinks there are 3 atomic powers around the Kashmir state, so there need to be a military presence. But unfortunately, we have about 1.2 million diaspora of the British Kashmiri Pakistanis in the UK, and out of that, I think about 70% we are the British Kashmiris. None or maybe 1 or 2 people turned up to the talk. We do not like to face the talk or the policies or the people we cannot agree or work with them. I always see when there are leaders from Pakistan or from this side of Kashmir, hundreds and thousands of people gathered around them, whether they all come and say we are here for the issue of Kashmir, but hardly anything is done apart from the personalizing the links and the social contacts that the diaspora is looking for. I questioned Umar Abdullah on United Nations resolutions in 1948, and he says that his reply or his words were there is a lot of water gone under the river of Jhelum since then. So then I said to him, I wanted freely to come to your place in Srinagar to have a cup of coffee with you. And he said I want same. I said, you come here, I'll offer you a meal on this side. But I as a Kashmiri or the both side Kashmiris, we wanted to be freely go to Srinagar, to this side or wherever we want to. That is our state. state belongs to the Kashmiris, there shouldn't be any control checks in the state. But both sides' arguments needed to be listened and faced. Whether Omar Abdullah is a pro-Indian, I really don't have problem with that. It is human right, whether they are pro-Indian or pro-Pakistan or whether they are independent. What the Kashmiri has been asking for last 70 years, a right of self-determination to decide whether they wanted to go with India or Pakistan, but I think after 50, 70 or years, there's got to be a third option on the table, whether they want to go with one country or the other country or stay as an independent state. That is a debate. That debate has to happen from the both sides, and for that reason, I had no problem of meeting Omar Abdullah and talking to him and asking these questions, and the same questions I do ask and say to this side of the Kashmiris when they come here. As alone, we here are voiceless, or we would say our voice is not heard, or the issue is not taken as we would like, or we would have seen. But as we all say that there is end of this tunnel, there is a light. It is that we hope that our motherland, the state, will be free, and one day we will be a one unit of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, which takes a large area than what we call Azad Kashmir. So I would leave only on this note that all sides please continue these talks and never ends or break the talks until the issue of Kashmir is resolved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. I think your words echo Frank's, that there are indeed different truths, and it's important that we educate ourselves to find out what those different truths are. It's now with great pleasure I'm going to ask PJ Mir, who has come all the way from Pakistan, especially for this conference from to give us his thoughts and words. As we know, he is president of the Din Media Group. Thank you, PJ.
Thank you very much. Good evening, gentlemen. Chair Victoria and Chairman Barrister Trumbo and Mr. Shaw and distinguished guests, good evening and Assalamu Alaikum. All who are present here, they understand why they're here. I wrote a speech, but then speeches are only written and you keep on modifying because you hear different views, and this is what we're all here gathered for. To listen to each other, because the theme tonight or this afternoon is exactly the same. The river is flowing in the same direction in different ways. Some over the rocks, some under the rocks, some by the sides, but it's all in the same direction. And we're talking about human rights. I speak with a special passion, particularly because my grandfather was the first General Secretary of the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, along with Javed Iqbal, who later on became Justice Javed Iqbal, Allama Iqbal's son, and General Akbar and a few others. And at that time, Sardar Ibrahim was the president of Azad Kashmir. I've lived quite a bit of my time in Azad Kashmir, studied there in Muzaffarabad, and I've grown up there. And I've seen Kashmir over a period of times. But when we speak here today, first of all, I'd really like to say thank you to Frank for opening up a very hurtful nerve of at least mine, and I'm sure Mr. Trumbo's and Mr. Shaw's as well, that the closure of the Kashmir centers has taken the very hard work the gentlemen here have put in to a standstill. And you'll agree on that. Most of us are from Kashmir, from Pakistan, or maybe even from India or England. But this matter has to be discussed on an international platform. And that is the platform we've left behind, the EU. When Barrister Trumbo was talking about the mass graves, who highlighted it? He did it at the EU, and Frank was there, and so many others. All of that has gone down. And I have complained quite strongly to the people concerned, all over, the general people, that why have you closed that? We need to revive that. We need to put it out to make it a very strong platform to highlight the case of Kashmir. As Suraya said, that we're talking about genocide. Genocides we've seen, yes, we've seen the Red Indian genocide. We've seen the Aborigine genocide. We've seen, just recently, the Rohingyas genocide. Well, we've been seeing Kashmir's genocide. Who's been talking about it? No one. No one takes it seriously. And predominantly why? One of the speakers just before me very rightly said, because we all use it as a personal platform. No. Use it as an international platform to highlight the cause, the violations of human rights, the problems. Because this conflict has brought in a lot of problems. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people being massacred and, as Barrister Trumbo said, mass graves and so on and forth. But what has come out of it? In Europe, or in the United States, one little bird gets out of line and the international media takes it up. Here, millions of people get killed and butchered, pregnant women being bayoneted, nothing happens. What happened in Bosnia? I've got videos of actually soldiers cutting out, women's, stomachs, pregnant women's stomachs. So where was the international media? Where was the international platform? I must give credit here to both the Houses of Commons and House of Lords for, airing and highlighting the Kashmir issue in their houses. I think it's a great step. But what about the rest of the world? The Americans in particular, they speak of democracies and so on and forth. Where is democracy in Kashmir? Where is democracy in India? Why don't they speak about the violation of human rights? Here, they don't allow one man to go into the United States when he's the Chief Minister of Gujarat, and he becomes the Prime Minister of India, and they welcome him with the red carpet. Where are the principles? This is something which needs to be talked about. If you remember, the first discourse on Kashmir in particular took place in 2004, and then in 2006, it was again a successful event hosted by the Kashmir Center there. At that time, President Musharraf, he had 4 points, and I've written those 4 points, the way forward. And even Jaswant Singh, when I interviewed him at the Hilton in London, he agreed with me that had they stayed on Kashmir, we would have come quite a bit closer. But with a sigh, nothing happened. Acknowledgement and acceptance of the dispute of Kashmir. This is the crux of it. No one acknowledges it and no one says it's a dispute. And I'll tell you why. Putting aside, number two, putting a meaningful and sustained dialogue over a period of time, it doesn't happen. Because every time there's a dialogue, and I've seen it in discourses with Mr. Trumbo, that when the Indians come, there's a debate on what? Commas, full stops, hyphens. And this is where the debate, really ends up and gets nowhere. 3, the other thing which really is examining possible solutions which may be acceptable to all parties and mainly to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan and India may talk, but I've never seen delegations actually, either from the Indian side or from the Pakistan side. And I've been very clear with the Prime Ministers and the President that they should take Kashmiris with them. They speak of Kashmir and about Kashmir, but what about the Kashmiris? Why can't they interact? On the other side, when Mr. Bassett in the embassy brings the Kashmiri leaders forward, the dialogues break up. India starts a different show altogether. So we need to be really looking forward with some reasoning and sensibility. But at this moment, we are seeing huge amounts of violations on the borders. Only last week somebody was telling me that one of the officers, Pakistan Army officers, that there is so much of atrocity the Indian soldiers commit on the borders that nothing really takes place of it because there's no publicity, you can't really speak out of it. I've had the opportunity of doing a lot of television programs with a panel from New Delhi and the panel from Pakistan. They've had lots of generals. In fact, some of the generals, Ashok Mehta and Brigadier Gurmeet, they were sitting on that side and we had our own generals and all. Their anchors have only one thing in common, to provoke. Hit back on provocation and provocation, mental and verbal provocations, with the result that our sides instead of talking reasonable, they start, reacting. And the whole 40 minutes of this conversation really goes to waste. See it on the Indian television, India News in particular, where we've been doing programs. So I stopped doing the programs. I said, to them, I said, listen, if you cannot talk sensibly and all you want to do is convince the people in India that we are wrong and you're always right, what is the point of talking with you people? So Deepak Chaurasia. So I said, Deepak, there's no point in talking to you because all you do is, throw a little light and all of a sudden there's flares on both sides of the panels. This is not the way to be. So I stopped it. Let me tell you, this conflict has led 2 countries to being nuclear, simply because of Kashmir. These countries have gone nuclear. Okay, China may have, India may have probably China in their mind, but it led us to go nuclear. For what? For war, not for peaceful designs. And I know it will never work, it's a deterrent. This conflict has led to terrorism. This conflict has led to poverty. This conflict has led to the destruction of the social fabric of both the countries, not one country, both the countries. This conflict has led to global warming. You go into Kashmir, you see what's happening. We've burnt out everything. Why? Because there's no progress, there's no work, so they're cutting the wood out. The environment is getting damaged. And this conflict, if not stopped, will destroy the complete environment of the area. What we call the Switzerland of the East is going to be the desert of the East. And it's not far. So, where can we speak about human rights when the people who live on that land, as Professor Scholl earlier on said, they have no rights? So what land are we talking about? And this, let me tell you, has led to one other thing which not many people have really taken grasp of. If you remember in 1926, Lenin's dreams of having access to the warm waters. Then in 79 we had this great war, the Taliban emerged out of that. And then, after that, of course, then the whole area has been into absolute turmoil. Pakistan, victim of terrorism, of these Taliban and fundamentalists and radicals and so on and forth. Today, somebody who has not fired a single bullet, not even a 9mm bullet, is now taking charge of Gwadar, China. Just think about it. They have come all the way without firing anything and saying, let's start an economic corridor. Think about it.
Yes.
And yet the Russians did everything to come across and take over. We resisted, of course. Why? Because we are at loggerheads with India. Had India been sensible, today India would have been part of this corridor. India would have been successful, Pakistan would have been successful, even Iran would have even gone in on that, and Afghanistan would have been the actual beneficiary. But what have we done? We've destroyed each other because everybody plays in each other's hands, and not realizing that without peace, there's nothing which we can achieve. And I blame only one organization for this, the toothless and the impotence of United Nations. The 49 resolutions, the 48 resolutions, and so on and forth. What have they done out of it? Nothing. Nothing. So much so, their impotence proved in the Iraq war. When the Security Council was overruled by the Americans and they came in Iraq, that showed how potent the United Nations were. I'll give you an example. In 1971, I was in artillery. I fought in the war just outside Lahore in Ganda Singh, near Kasoor. And when we took over one of the, there were two posts, Fakhr Hind and Fakhr Hind and some other Hind. And there was one captain, Gurmeet Singh. He was alone fighting here in MG-183 and he was fighting and everybody was under cover till one of the grenades hit his leg, left leg, and he was bleeding profusely, so he said surrender. So he came out. And the Pakistan Army, as to what they blamed the Pakistan Army, I was there. Jawans of the Pakistan Army picked him up with respect, put him on the defense perimeter, the road which leads onto the Sutlej River, tell the ADS, the army, that ambulance to come in. So he asked a cigarette, And he said in Punjabi, "Yaar assi ki ladki apa ladki ho rahe hain assi." These were his words. And you know, he didn't even know why we were fighting. So what are we fighting for? Killing each other? Is that the solution? No, that is not the solution. And today, let me tell you, going back in time, I spoke to Dr. Kissinger at the Millennium Hotel in New York, and I said, "Dr. Kissinger, you've been involved in this Kashmir." He laughed. I still have that video, I'll show you. He says, 40 Kashmir? Oh, it's been 40 years I've been working on it. I couldn't solve it. It's only the people of Pakistan and India who can resolve it. Exact words. Just outside the Prime Minister's room. Now, we have another maverick in the making of Mr. Donald Trump. What he has done yesterday has destroyed any further peace in the Middle East. The 1.5 billion Muslims will get up and rise unless sanity prevails. Although this was started in '94, and then later on Obama, the Senate approved it, and today he said, you know, it's an election, sort of a promise he's made, but he has really destroyed the very fabric of peace, which may or might have existed. I've been to Jerusalem. I covered the 2006 war from Israel, while my counterpart covered it from Lebanon. In Jerusalem, everybody lives in peace. There's the Christian, the Jew, the Orthodox Christian, you know, everybody, the Muslim. No issue. That little peace. Go outside, you have differences of opinions. People are intermarried with different faiths. Everything is the same. Even the Israeli who's standing outside, I went into Aqsa with my shoes on, he made me to get my shoes off. It's a different thing inside. Now, we are dividing that. This man, Trump, is dividing it. And this is where the danger factor lies. And this is going to be the cause of another conflict. Another, I'd say, violations of human rights, which are in the offing. So what do we do? And I think that finally, if these factors are not handled judiciously, we're looking at conflict after conflict after conflict. And what do we do, gentlemen? It's up to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for what was probably rather depressing, but nonetheless very realistic set of strategic observations. I think your point about television is unfortunately ratings, and the belligerent language is ratings. I myself was on a panel at King's College. I'm not sure if anybody is here who was there at the end of October, and it was Indians and Pakistanis and some Kashmiris, and it was uproar. It was impossible. It was sort of 2 hours of wasted time, and a Palestinian girl came up to me and she said, "I wanted to learn something here, but I've learned absolutely nothing." So I think we do have to speak on these issues with what I would call sagacity. Right, that marks the end of this session. We are slightly running out of time for the sessions, but I've let everybody go on and say their presentations because I think what everyone said is so interesting. But we might just have 2 or 3 questions to our 4 speakers. Do we have any questions? Soraya, you're a speaker. You can't ask a question. Sorry. Next time. Yes, Councillor.
Sorry.
We'll allow you to have another question.
Yeah.
If you'd like to answer your question, because as I said, we are slightly, if I have the indulgence of the audience, it's also interesting what we're listening to.
Sure. What I've taken and heard is this lack of political will. We have a maverick who's supposed to be the world's democratic and most powerful country, and we don't have the media on our side. What hope does that leave us? And my question is, the only way forward perhaps is to remind the civic society to stand up and do something and act. How will you or will this group work towards getting the civic society or empower them to reject some of the notions which have been floated?
Well, I think that's actually a question to be held and answered in perhaps our closing plenary, if you don't mind, because I think this is what we're trying to do today, this is what we're trying to do in so many conferences, is to engage civil society so that everybody in their individual ways is aware. And I think, again, Frank's point of education, that everyone is aware of what's going on, because until people have facts and figures to their fingertips, nothing will happen. But it is a responsibility that we all bear. But if I could just hold the answer from the panelists until later. Do we have any other questions? Yes, gentlemen. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Hi.
First of all, I would like to thank all of you for organising this and organisers. Brilliant event. My name is Ifkhar Chaudhry from Northampton. I have been working since 1982 to 2012 with the United Nations, backward and forward. And probably next thing I'm going to say, I'll be giving my age away. I can remember protests from mid-60s when motorway M1 wasn't there. People used to travel from Bradford, Manchester, Birmingham, protesting against India in favour of Pakistan. A lot of work has gone into it, but unfortunately, 70 years after, the only thing we've got to see is all the dead bodies, human rights violation, and we have failed. I had a pleasure of speaking to many.
Is this a statement or a question?
No, I will be coming to my question.
Okay.
I will be coming to my question.
Thank you.
I had a pleasure of putting this case to 3 of our previous Prime Ministers on Kashmir. Prime Minister means of here in Downing Street, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and David Cameron. I think the issue we need to look at is, what have we achieved in 70 years? Unfortunately, not much. Do we need to get back to the drawing board and say, right, where have we been failing? Why isn't anybody helping us? Why aren't the other countries, Muslim countries, developing countries, standing shoulder to shoulder with us? That's my question. Do we need to go back to the drawing board and say why we failed for 70 years to achieve, after losing so many jobs, so many lives, such a devastating situation in Kashmir? That's my question. We need to go back to drawing board.
Thank you. Do we need to go back to the drawing board? Who from this current panel would like to answer this question? Frank, what about you? Do we need to go back to the drawing board with Kashmir?
It's impossible in life. It's impossible in life to go back. What we have to do is to learn out of the past and possibly be a little bit like an eagle, flying higher and higher to look in the past, to look on the actual situation, and in the future, and look at what we can learn from other conflicts which have been overcome. We had conflicts in the Basque Country, in Northern Ireland, in South Sudan, in Timor, East Timor, and it was possible to overcome it. Learn how others have done it, and then try how it's possible to transfer this experience into your own case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Well, I think I've got to close this session. I like thinking of closing on an eagle. Oh, Martin, no, I don't think I can have you make points. You know, you can make your points. It's in your own field. Yes, you can make your points in the because we are running sort of short of time. Is that okay?
Okay, well, you're the chair.
I have to be a little bit strict, but I'm strict with my co-organisers because we must respect the time of the speakers who are coming. We're going to start our second roundtable discussion with Alaya Bayoumi. Where are you? Oh, you're here. Excellent. News editor of Al Jazeera UK. So perhaps if you'd like to come and make your comments. Thank you so much. We have, as I say, we have less speakers on this panel. So if you could talk to seven thank you.
First, thank you so much for inviting me today, and I really appreciate your time and interest in listening to us. We are media, so we are not activists, we are not politicians, we don't take any political sides, we can't be with any party, but basically our goal is to try to reach the truth, or try to understand what is going on. And dealing with areas of conflict, I think Al Jazeera in particular might have some little experience in this issue, considering that we are based on the Middle East. We come from the Middle East, which is an area that has occupied the world attention for the last few days, no, maybe for the last few decades. because of conflict, and I think it will keep world attention for the next few years because of also the ongoing conflict. And I think the more we cover it, it is a learning experience for us, because we are journalists. We also learn. We also try to reflect. We, as our colleague here was saying, we are trying to look from the above and learn from our mistakes and try to improve what we have done. So basically, for the last, I would say, for the last 10 years or of our coverage with the Arab Spring, the several wars we have been witnessing, and with the opening conflicts we are also seeing in the Middle East, we are getting to learn about how difficult it is to understand a society that's going through conflict, and how difficult it is to report on it and to help it. To help it as a media, not as activists, not as politicians, because we can't help people we can't take sides, but we can help people try to understand the current status of their society, the current status of the conflicts they are going through, and how can they move forward, and what they need to move forward for. Because as media, we don't take any political sides, but we are committed to certain values. We are committed to democracy, human rights, pluralism, and freedom. So we don't care about who is part of the conflict. Are they Arabs, Muslims, non-Arabs, non-Muslims? Are they African, not African? Are China fighting Russia over economic interests? We don't care. We only care about the values that controls our job. However, implementing these values in areas like the Middle East, like Africa, like Southeast Asia, is not as implementing them in Europe, in America, in Latin America, in Eastern Europe. Basically, we need to remind ourselves all the time that societies are different. We need also to remind ourselves of three main principles, which I want to talk today about. First, we need to learn what's democracy. Because lots of people think, when they think about democracy, they think of Western Europe, and they think of America, despite the fact that democracy in America and Western Europe are a little bit different. There are differences in every society, but also democracy is not just a free election. It's not the end product. When you think about democracy, people think, oh, it's free election, you go to election day, you elect your own representative, you have few representatives, and that's it. They run the country. It's a parliament, it is political parties. However, democracy is much, much more complicated. It's a society, it's a system. You can't have a democracy, for example, if you don't have civil society organizations. And not every society around the world really knows what is a civil society organization is, because some societies are still going through some kind of a progress. They are more religious than civil, let's say. The religious controls, the religious part, tribes, play a major role. So they don't have a well-defined set of ideas that differentiate between what is tribal, what is religious, what is a civil society, what is a political party. Also, you can't have a democracy without free media. You can't have a democracy without economic equality, or some kind of economic equality, because democracy in a society that has a clear gap between the rich and the poor is not going to work. So, trying to understand democracy, and that democracy is not only an election, is not only a free election, will really help a lot when you cover conflicts. Like, recently with Mugabe stepping down, with elections in Kenya, you only hear in the media about government and opposition. However, if you are in the media, if you are a concerned party, you really need to understand that it is not just government and opposition. Even the concept of government in Kenya, that is not the concept of government in the UK. The concept of opposition. Some opposition in these countries are not well developed. And this is, I think this leads me to the second point, that basically, after you understand what is your ideal is, you need to understand the society you are dealing with. It's basically the Middle East. If you talk about the Middle East, for example, you are talking about societies that live in the 21st centuries, but their construction is different. The religion still plays a major role. Civil society is now well developed. Maybe civil society is more counting on foreign aid coming from Western human rights organizations, but it's not the same, like, you have hundreds or dozens of human rights organizations that were built in the West. It's different. The economy is not just, is not equal. The concept of free media may not be there. So you really need to understand also the societies that you are dealing with, and how difficult it is to move it toward democracy. And when you're talking about societies, and it's not only domestic players that affect conflicts. As we're all aware, it's a balance of power. And sometimes a foreign country might have more influence than what goes inside a particular country than their own players. So when you think about, let's say, a conflict, like the Arab-Israeli conflict, for example, the role of the West is very important. The role of foreign powers is very important. You know, the amount of arms and finances, like, you know, like maybe, let's say, a country like the US may sell Saudi Arabia at least $10 billion worth of arms a year. So the amount of influence that these countries have on regimes is huge. So when you think about democracy in the Middle East, you can't think of democracy by just thinking about poor, sometimes, you know, the poor opposition. The poor opposition cannot do much if the international community cannot help democracy. You know, when you think about governments, the government there is not really a well-established governments. They don't have institutions. They are supported by networks of power in the economy, in the military. So really, it's a complicated picture. Finally, when you try to understand society, you need even to differentiate between the different groups. Muslims are different groups. The Muslim groups are different. The Muslim Brotherhood is different than the Salafis. The Salafis are various groups. Even the concept of Salafi is becoming very famous because a group like ISIL, for example, Daesh is a Salafi. But Salafis are so many of them that you can't say, we can't say all of them are one, basically. It's impossible. So coming to these two ideas, that basically understand that what you want, understand the society you are dealing with, finally understand there is something called, very important, called transition. Transition is the key. You can't move a certain society from a state of conflict to a state of peace overnight. You can't move as an Arab society who have been living under oppression for all its life to democracy overnight. And I think if I would blame myself as a media representative, I committed this mistake. After the Arab Spring, I started judging the Middle Eastern societies. Why are you not democratic? Where is the political parties? This is not a political party. This is not how a political party functions. This is not a president. You're listening to someone like the Egyptian president who's in jail now, Mohammed Morsi. You listen to him, he doesn't sound like Obama, he doesn't sound like Tony Blair. But he was not supposed to sound like any of them because he doesn't have experience. He spent all his life in a jail. So the problem is when you're dealing with a society that's just trying to leave conflict, you need to understand how to deal with it. Slowly, 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 so you can move it to a safer place and hopefully one day to democracy and peace. This is the conclusion of my talk. Thank you so much for that.
Very much, Ella. I think, yes, understanding the definition of democracy is important. It's not a magic wand that you can just wave. It's now with great pleasure I'm going to invite Tahir Aziz, Conciliation Resources, to come and give us his thoughts. Thank you. And his bio is up there, thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, the organizers, Trambu Saab and Shal Saab. I must say I thoroughly enjoyed listening to all the speeches. A lot of wisdom has been spoken. We have had a very convincing analysis of geopolitics surrounding Kashmir, also the Middle East, in terms of finding out the solutions to coming out of this situation. There have been very good advice and advices given. So I was also trying and struggling with my own thoughts as to what one can say that could be meaningful. And I'm still struggling, so you'll have to bear with me.
We have all the time to bear.
You have.
No, sorry, I've got to remember that. I know, Tahir, you speak from the heart and be concise, thank you.
I think this fundamental question that I had in mind, that despite all the speeches and analysis and everything, people are still struggling to understand as to why in 70 years the problem of Kashmir hasn't been resolved. And also that the world community hasn't come on board. And the human rights case hasn't been made in the world corridors of power, and the world system, the international politics, the UN, and what have you, hasn't come to our rescue. So it's a very interesting, legitimate question, and the problem is that there is no single answer to it. And there are so many factors, and some of the panelists and speakers, are you? Yes. Have given their answers, and quite convincingly. But I think still whenever somebody was allowed to ask a question, the same question was asked. So I will not try to answer that, but what I can say is there was a question about what can happen now. And I'm very much interested and impressed by some of the ideas that probably are not new, but we, if we will have to move forward, we have to look at them. And one thing was alluded to in terms of the final concluding session, that there would be some discussion or some thinking shared on as to what the civil society, how do you engage the civil society, and how do you, to me, I think that's probably the primary thing that we should be thinking about, given the audience, given the presence in this room. I think if we, I mean, it's legitimate to question the international systems and governments and UN regimes and UN human rights sort of work and all that. But at the end of the day, I think we have to also see that we are not states. This is not a UN General Assembly. This is not a meeting of governments. It's primarily voluntary association of people with different backgrounds and interests and concerns about human rights in general, but also here, I think the Kashmir question is bringing us together. So to me, that seems to be the central idea as to what can be done in terms of not going to the drawing board again, but moving forward and learning from the past. I think one thing that I would like to share in this context is that our organization, Conciliation Resources, has just recently, a couple of months back, done an opinion poll along with another organization called the Alliance for Peace Building, based in the US. And the opinion poll was in the US, in the UK, and in Germany. And the question was to see in this current heightened, polarized, very confused world, what do the people of these countries think about alternative ways to resolve conflict, other than the military approach that seems to be so dominant. But very interestingly, we were very sort of nervous because the elected governments in these countries do not necessarily represent. One would sort of think that the climate is not that much pro-alternatives, but a very significant community of people, percentage of people, actually voted in favor of alternative approaches. Now that is the West for you, the US, the UK, and Germany, 3 different countries. Overwhelming number of people have shown their belief and trust in terms of using alternative ways, and also very forcefully arguing that even going and talking to proscribed groups and armed groups is something that their governments and the UN should do to bring about peace in the world. They also voted for mediation for their countries and whatever government is involved in a conflict. So this is a very encouraging, important thing for us to see, that within these, and I have brought that publication with me, it's accessible on our website, gives a lot of detail about the process, the methodology, and many interesting numbers. But it should give us huge courage that we are not making a case that the world does not understand. But the case is made in terms of mediation that our friend Frank was talking about. It's made in terms of incremental peace building and changing the approach towards involving people. Now that takes me to my second point, and I'll finish after that. And I am a Kashmiri myself. I have worked on Kashmir practically for a very long time, but under the platform of Conciliation Resources for about 10, 11 years, on both sides of the line of control, with a lot of very concerned, creative individuals and groups from civil society, from governments, from all shades of life. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I think this group, these people can do a great favor if we understand that, and a lot of speakers have made that argument also, which is that whenever we talk about some alternative approach or an incremental way of changing, my friend called it transition, transformation, or something that takes us away from the conflict. I think there is a lot of internal resistance to that idea within Kashmir. I think the fear is that if you start talking about accepting those ideas, for example, non-violence. Non-violence is a very politically loaded thing in Kashmir, not only because it's associated with Gandhi, but also because it means that, in the face of state terrorism or state military approach, you're asking people to either accept that or not to resist. So it's a very contested, very difficult thing to accept. Similarly, the idea of confidence-building measures is either superficially accepted or even resisted. And again, the fear is that if you accept these things, if you accept non-violence, if you accept confidence-building measure as opposed to the grand solution of Kashmir, you will either dilute the issue or you will have to live with some sort of acceptance of the status quo. In my own thinking, that's absolutely not the case, because we heard and we have been saying, and everybody in this room and in Kashmir knows that there have been 70 years of other approaches, but they haven't worked. So we still come together in a room and ask the same question again, but don't go back and see that there can be perhaps some alternatives that we could actually try. Again, no guarantee that they will necessarily work, but if we understand transition, if we understand that conflict transformation is something important for us to understand, which can take us towards that journey, it will not ask us to give up on our political position or aspiration or achieving justice or looking for remedies for human rights. Then we can perhaps understand that. It's very difficult to make that connection, but I think, nobody should be stopped from advocating human rights, protection and whatever you can do to bring the world together and mobilize the international pressure and instruments. That's absolutely fine. If we can do that, great. But what I think we can do at the practical level is to understand internally how much of the internal dialogue and internal communication that we talk about is happening, and how much of that is happening from this forum, for example. That's the question that I am very much interested in. No foreign power or individual or external personality would guarantee us all these things. Nobody is going to present a Kashmir solution to us and say, you know, this is your solution, now take it home. It will have to happen from within. And when it comes to from within, we have a responsibility. We just say on the stage that it's okay to have diverse opinions, we accept that. But I think it's far more difficult when it becomes, the practical effort. And one of the things that we can do is to change these things and say, how can we bring everybody? I mean, Kashmiris and people of Kashmir are divided. Let's face this, even within this diaspora community. I've been attending so many meetings, and every time there is this agitation, as it were, in terms of saying they haven't achieved much. So there is division. Somebody was saying today that in the meetings there is very low percentage of Kashmiris who take part. So how are we going to bring people on board? That is also important. So looking for incremental changes within the region across the line of control seems like something that we have to build on, because this exists between the two countries. They have also, to some extent, agreed upon. So if we build on that and include other people and mobilize civil society and agree that believe that there are other people in the West who believe in these things, should be an encouraging thing for us to do. Sorry, it just probably wasn't something that you wanted to hear, but I thought other sort of things have been covered, so I tried to make a case for what I call, incremental conflict transformation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tahir, very much. I think it is important that we hear things sometimes that we don't necessarily want to hear, but I think the transition, and this is where we're on the sticking point of how to move forward, and this is what we need to further our discussions about. Our final speaker for this session, this roundtable session, is Mir Adnan Rahman, faculty member of the University of AJK. Have you come all the way from AJK?
From AJK.
Thank you so much. I hope you brought some soil with you.
Thank you. Esteemed Chair, Mr. Professor Shah, Mr. Trambu, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everyone. As this event is organized in the backdrop of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as on every year, 10th December is being celebrated as the as the day for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as International Human Rights Day. So let me start my presentation with 3 lines from the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Recognizing the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights for the members of the human family is the foundation of the justice, freedom, and peace across the globe. So these 3 words are very important: peace, justice, and prosperity. And these 3 words are basically dependent upon the most important thing, and that is the right to self-determination. As I'm from Azad Jammu and Kashmir, I'm son of the soil of the Jammu and Kashmir. So the theme of this session is basically making peaceful resolution possible of different conflicts, particularly the conflict of the Kashmir. So I would like to speak and relate my speech with the Kashmir dispute. We need to understand some basic dimensions of the dispute of the Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir dispute is not a dispute between 2 belligerent states. It is basically not a religious dispute. It is basically a dispute of the right to self-determination of around 15 million people of erstwhile state of the Jammu and Kashmir. And that is the bottom line which we need to understand. as we need, I have just shared with you the preamble of the UDHR, so we need to understand that right to self-determination is basically the foundation of all the other rights. The civil rights, political rights, economic rights, social rights, and cultural rights, all these rights are basically connected with the right to self-determination. And it is not possible to create any economic prosperity or to generate any sort of civil, or to give people civil liberties without the basic, inalienable and fundamental right, which is the right to self-determination. If you look through the history of the development of the human rights, we see that, first of all, if you go through the preamble of the United Nations Charter, so there you find a connection, a relevance with the right to self-determination. And then if we see the UDHR, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they also talk about the right to self-determination. And as Professor Shah rightly quoted the International Convention, basically a resolution of the United Nations General Assembly for the decarbonization, they also talk about the right to self-determination. And then on the basis of that resolution, a special committee on decarbonization was formed in 1962, and then lastly in 1970, a resolution was passed by the United Nations Security Council while recognizing the right to self-determination of the people of around the globe who have been struggling for their independence. So we need to see that right to self-determination is basically the bedrock which can guarantee all other rights for the people of the Jammu and Kashmir. So if we generally see the context of the Indian occupied Kashmir, there are not just only the human rights violations, but let me share with you a different legal approach that in Jammu and Kashmir, these are not just the human rights violations, rather these are the crimes against humanity. These are the war crimes. And we need to understand that why these are war crimes, why these are crimes against humanity. The basic fact is that, first of all, we need to know that Jammu and Kashmir is occupied by India, number one. And number two, recently a report was shared by Mr. Khurram Parvez. Khurram Parvez is a local human rights activist. He published a report with the name of Structured Violence. In that report, he quoted that there are around 0.7 million Indian law enforcement agencies personnel. So it means that Indian occupied Kashmir is basically the highest militarized zone of the world. If Indian occupied Kashmir is the highest militarized zone of the world, and Jammu and Kashmir is basically occupied, so if you see the Geneva Conventions and additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions 1 and 2 of 1966, it is mentioned there, all the wars of national liberation should be considered as international armed conflict, or they can be considered as non-international armed conflict. So if Jammu and Kashmir is basically an international armed conflict, or for the sake of argument, it is non-international armed conflict, so it would be unjustified to call them human rights violations. These should be called as war crimes. These should be called as crimes against humanity, in addition to the human rights violations, because human rights are basically designed to protect the interest of the people during peacetime. Whenever any war breaks out, or whenever any emergency breaks out, then these human rights actually cease to work. They cannot deliver for the purpose for which they have been designed. So there comes the operation of the Geneva laws, then comes the operation of the Hague laws. So basically, the case of the Jammu and Kashmir is basically, in addition to the human rights violation, it is a case of the crimes against humanity, it is a case of the war crimes, and the report of the Khurram Parvez is the best report because, as you actually mentioned about that report, in that report, Khurram Parvez actually collected and documented number of cases of killings, maiming people, torturing people, fake encounters, extrajudicial killings with evidence. He has almost documented 333 perfect cases where the personnel of the Indian law enforcement agencies, they have been enjoying impunity and they could not be tried by the courts of the Jammu and Kashmir, right from the local court to the Supreme Court of India. So that is basically a perfect case for the International Criminal Court. But unfortunately, India has deliberately not only ratified the Additional Protocol 1 and 2 of 1966, but also India did not intentionally not ratify the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court. So basically, so what can be done? So, being the state subject of the Jammu and Kashmir, being a Kashmiri, I think that if the human rights activists, human rights organizations, international community, if they work on this aspect of the dispute of the Jammu and Kashmir, and they could actually highlight the abuses of human rights, war crimes in Indian occupied Kashmir, so much so if they also highlight the malicious intentions and ulterior motives of the Indian state. There at one side, India has been planning to become the permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. But on the other hand, India is not ratifying the different documents of the human rights, different documents of the Geneva laws and Hague laws. This speaks actually volumes about the character of the India, which claims to be a democracy, which claims to be the human rights champion. But on the other hand, it has deliberately planned and made designs to suppress the voices of the people of the Jammu and Kashmir, to oppress the local people. So, so what can be done? What is basically the way forward? From my point of view, way forward is that the local human rights activists like Ghulam Parvez, the local organizations like Jammu and Kashmir Coalition for Civil Society, the activists in Azad Jammu and Kashmir, the Kashmiri diaspora, and all those human rights organizations and all those human rights activists who have been working on the human rights throughout the world, they should highlight this particular aspect of the Kashmir dispute, because I am a firm believer actually of the UN system. Because if we go out of this UN system, then we will be in a state of nothingness. And I don't want to go in that state of nothingness where there will be anarchy, where there will be lawlessness. So I think we have to show our trust on the UN system. We should not blame the system. We should work for the strengthening of the system. We should work for the making this system further stronger, so that this system delivers. If we start blaming the system, if we start accusing the UN system, then automatically all those forces who want to suppress all those nations who have been suppressed by them, so they will be further strengthened. So as it was actually also mentioned in the introduction of this theme, so there are many actually violations of the human rights. Like if you can see the data and statistics of the fake encounters, you can see the data of the extrajudicial killings. There have been reports about the nameless mass graves of the people of the Jammu and Kashmir. Last time the Jammu and Kashmir State Human Rights Commission submitted a report regarding the nameless mass graves, and on that report, the police department actually submitted a challan, and I think things are still pending and still need to be further explored. But if you see the overall picture of the dispute, which clearly shows that if there are massive violations of the human rights, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and this day is very important, this day is very significant because this is the real mandate of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be called as the Magna Carta for the human rights regime. So if this is a mandate of the UDHR, so I think we need to highlight these abuses of the India in Indian occupied Kashmir, and it is a need of the heart for the India and Pakistan, both the states. They should also include the people of the Jammu and Kashmir as the necessary party in the negotiation, which are right now not in progress. But whenever any process starts on the issue of the Kashmir, both India and Pakistan should include the people of the Jammu and Kashmir who are the necessary party. So this is my actually first way forward. And second way forward is that I actually would like to agree with Mr. Tahir Aziz, and I was also a part of this process of conflict transformation in Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and I have been involved in some cross-LOC interactions. So I think this issue of this aspect is also very important. We need to introduce CBMs, confidence building measures, and we need to further strengthen the confidence building measures, because unless and until if we wait for the resolution of the Kashmir dispute for years, and we let the miseries and plight of the people of the Jammu and Kashmir unguarded, unprotected, then the loss and the abuses and the miseries would be multiplied. So we need to introduce the civilians, we need to go for the conflict transformation. So transforming the conflict is very important. So while protecting the human rights, while promoting the civilians, it is a need of the hour that conflict should be transformed in its true nature and spirit. So with these words, I would like to take leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm glad you highlighted Khurram Parvez's report, and I think the thing that's very significant about his report is that all the information contained in it is from actually Indian government sources. And this is something that says it's not that he's fabricated these figures, these are all figures that are already endorsed by the Indian government, and it makes very chilling reading. That's the end of this session. We are, again, I'm afraid, over time. If anyone has a burning question they'd like to ask Frank,
yeah.
I recognise you. Thank you. And Margit, I will allow your question.
Three wonderful presentations. For me as a German, especially wonderful was what Ala Bayumi said. Because Germany, 1945, majority was in the brain, racist, militaristic, hierarchical, populist, and aggressive. And it was needed 50 years, 2 generations, to transform Germany into a quite open-minded society. And therefore you need time and everything of saying 1 year, 2 years after a shift. Why are you not? It's understandable, but not justified. But I was disappointed by you as well. Because you said civil society is important, but I think you forgot one aspect. Democracy means as well the respect for those who lost the last elections. And it means as well to consider it as normal that you are losing this election. Because this is a normal game of democracy, the normal mechanics of democracy. In the way, this is my last sentence to this, Voltaire, the famous French philosopher said, Allah, Bayumi, I don't agree with you, but I would do everything that you can express your opinion. He wasn't knowing you yet, but that means important is to look in the eyes of someone who says something that you don't share and says, I don't share your opinion, but I will do everything that you have the right to express it. That is a part of democracy. It means not to govern only by the majority, but to have respect for the minority in the last elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I take that as a comment.
Yes. No, that I was disappointed by you. Yes.
Right. Right. Okay. I have to allow Margit very few minutes to.
No, I have a question for Tahir Aziz. I echo everything what he has said. To be quite honest, we are civil society and we have to do everything on our own. But my question to you is, we have a right-wing government in India, a very difficult government in India, not for only Kashmiris, but for Indians themselves. General Pervez Musharraf ran 4-point formula, which he was calling out-of-box solution. And that time it was what we can call a secular government in India. It didn't work with the secular government. What would you expect from the right-wing government if we go down to your route?
Right, a difficult question. Just hold that question for a minute because we have one at the back here, and then Soraya, I will allow you your question.
I'd like a question.
Yes, no, I will allow your question. Just that gentleman there, and the one next to Soraya. Thank you.
Good evening, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, it's a comment and a question as well. Rambu, Shah Saab and Victoria, thank you very much for organizing this program. My message and questions from my mother, who is living in Kashmir, Srinagar in depression, because she lost her son, my elder brother, who was a police officer, who was beaten by the Indian Army, and after 2 years he died. She says, my question is for British Raj. Why you sold us a beautiful nation with people, with lakes, with forests? Now some of the MPs, whenever I go in the parliament, nearly 6 members of parliament, they say, We created this mess, we have to solve it. You have the muscles, conferences, seminars from 70 years. In Kashmir, 800,000 professional Indian armies engaged in killing, rape, and now the cutting of the bread chops. Now from my village, there are 6 girls now in the mental hospital after they lost their hair. Now the British Raj, I request you should have something, a mechanism, follow-up of the meetings, and pressurize British government. They have the muscles, they can do it. The most civilized nation on earth, the mother of parliaments, they sold the stigma on their face. They sold a beautiful nation. We are not separatists. Kashmir was a free, independent country for many thousand years. So we are not separatists. We want our right to self-determination. So message from my mother is, why don't British Raj, British government be proactive? Do they like blood for money? The money for blood? Do the British, this is a question. Do the British government like money for blood doing business with India? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Soraya,
Thank you. I'd just like to return to the fact that if we continue to use the term in terms of language, if we continue to use the term dispute, aren't we moving away from the fact that it is actually a military occupation? This is the very thing that the Israelis have done in Palestine. So we need to be very careful. We need to call it a military occupation and not a dispute. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. Frank's was a comment. Majid Tatahir.
Difficult question, Trambu. I wouldn't expect anything easy from you. I mean, I share the same frustration. But I think, you know, when we are exploring something sitting here, when so much of the hard work that you, Shalsa, everybody else has put in terms of not only today, but for the past so many years. I mean, I admire that, but at the same time, I think we should try to open our minds and listen to our friends who have come together, who are not from Kashmir, but are giving us some good piece of advice. And they are our friends. They are not asking us to accept the status quo. What they are saying is that it is a difficult thing. We have to probably also be creative. Not that what we aspire for or what we stand for or what we don't like is something, there is something wrong with it, whether we call it dispute or, you know, all these things coexist and they're right. I mean, the problem with it, there are multiple truths. We don't accept that idea. There is no single truth. That is something quite radical. We have to engage with this idea. It's just very simple to say, you know, oh yes, there are many truths. But what does it actually mean? So if we follow a legal process for the solution of Kashmir, if we can, yes, we should do that. And nobody is saying don't follow that route. You know, there can be speeches made in favor of UN mediated solution. But also the fact remains that we have seen that hasn't happened. I mean, everybody here would also agree that this system, the world system, is fully higher expectation from a right-wing government in Delhi. But the fact remains that both the right wing and the left, relatively left wing, they have actually, I mean, there has been time when everything between the two countries has stopped. But this line of control contact, for some reason, under some pressure, has always been revived and is continued. So trade, tiny, I don't want to exaggerate its importance, but listen to this. There is something about it. This has allowed people all over the globe to accept that there is something between the two Kashmirs that needs to be connected. There is a legitimacy of that thing that has been established through this tiny process of bus and truck crossing across the line of control. Look at the
the potential of that idea, because it is something that is transformative. Of course, the two countries have a very rigid stance over Kashmir, and you cannot expect them to change that. Nobody's saying that. But there is something that has happened that has allowed the two to accept something different, that which they were not ready to do that. So the idea is to also see that side of the thing, and perhaps if that process grows, that will allow Kashmiris to be stronger, to have more capacity, more power in their argument, and also a potential for something bigger. So again, if you ask me what is the guarantee for that, I can't say anything. I mean, this is just whatever we are doing here today, and you will be doing in the future, that's just an attempt and an effort. So we need to learn from the past, like our friend tells us, and see those things. So that's the whole point. Yeah.
Thank you, Tanya. This very difficult question. I mean, firstly, I have brought some copies of my book, which does explain the whole sale of Kashmir. I'm British. I'm not proud of that history, and I think, as we've just heard, the world is full of hypocrisy. The world is full of injustice. So please read the book and take that back to your mother in Srinagar in terms of the past. And in terms of the present, the mess we've made, I'll re-quote Soraya, where there's no political courage, there's no political will. It's a big question, and I can't go into it now, because regrettably we've got 20 minutes left, we've got 5 speakers, and then the concluding plenary.
Just add one sentence to what you have said.
Please add, right.
In 2006...
One sentence.
No. In 2006, when Brad Cox was attending a conference here in the Westminster, he said, to begin with, the British government must tender an apology to the people of Jammu and Kashmir for the sale date of 1856.
Thank you. You did actually keep that to one sentence with a few phrases. Okay, right. Well, I'm really sorry, and I have not been a very good chair in terms of just shutting people off, because I feel when you've come a long way to make a presentation, it's very demoralizing to be told you've only got 4 or 5 minutes. So we have had some lengthy speeches. Are we going to have to leave this room at 5 o'clock?
No, you don't.
So I hope we might, as there are refreshments, we might be able to stay on perhaps a little bit longer. That was a question. It's not question time.
It's just a comment.
No, we can't have a comment at this stage. Comment later, because I'm now going to introduce. We've got 5 speakers. My first speaker, the lead speaker, is Lord Duncan McNair.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the both organisations that have put this event together. We are commemorating the signing of the Universal Declaration on the 10th of December 1948, and we're focusing on resolutions of conflict in general. Of course, there are many excellent initiatives underway in the field of resolving conflict and building peace. Some focus on specific conflicts, some focus on specific weapons of war, some on legal and diplomatic issues. All these are valuable and important. Peaceful Planet Human Rights Education focuses on educating people about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this was what the authors and signatories of the Universal Declaration intended, that people everywhere should be educated on the preamble and 30 articles of the UDHR. This enables people to understand their own rights and other people's rights. And just as an example, what Peaceful Planet is doing, we have an association with an NGO in Iraqi Kurdistan, and they're using our Kurdish materials to educate teachers, police, and security officials. While the present conflict countries, we would have a very different world. We would have a very different understanding of community, of human rights, of the other person's point of view, and so on. Now the thing is that we should understand that all specific violations of human rights, specific violations, like the soldier who pulls the trigger of the gun that fires the pellets, all these specific violations are actually carried out by individuals. So if we educate individuals to respect other people's human rights and to understand what their own rights are, that is a beginning. We tend to focus on what is wrong. And in my experience, whatever you focus on, you get more of. So if you focus on problems, you get more problems. If you focus on solutions, at least you have a chance of moving in the direction of a solution. But ultimately, human rights is about how we treat other people, other human beings. Now, I heard an anecdote from the issue and the area which concerns most people here today. And that was a senior Indian officer became interested in the human rights education materials that are available on both the Peaceful Planet website and on the Youth for Human Rights website. And he took these to heart and he started, I don't know what happened to this initiative, but he started to educate his troops. And a very strange thing happened, because from their perspective, they found that they had less terrorist incidents, what they would call terrorist incidents. And the obvious point is that they were doing something different. Now, Soraya talked about it being insanity to continue doing the same thing and expect to get a different result. So what was happening there was that the particular section of the line of control, or whatever it was, they were doing something different, and they were getting a different result. Now we have been focusing on human rights education for speakers of Middle Eastern languages in the UK. And we have the materials translated into Arabic, Turkish, Kurdish, Farsi, and Urdu. And we have actually run 160 workshops. That's about 11 different series of workshops on the Universal Declaration. And what we found was that we are getting, with this combination of process and content, we are actually finding that people are having cognitive and behavioral trouble with, or I was having terrible trouble with my mother and my sister and my girlfriend. And he said, but I realized I was being really macho and controlling. He said, I was treating my family like property. And even a lecturer who's had a terrific career in business and has obviously grown up children, a daughter who's a doctor in the UK here. And but he's from Iran, and so I guess he'd been a sort of fairly orthodox, authoritarian Middle Eastern lad. And his daughter said to him, after he just taught this series, Dad, what's happened to you? You've changed so much. So I think what we're doing has value. People learning about and discussing respect for human dignity and the value of the individual then seeing how this is applied by respecting the 30 articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, experience changes. That's what we found. So when considering the Pride as a whole, it's very important to understand human rights from all these perspectives. Now, our intentions with the training and the website are to equip participants with a working knowledge of the preamble and articles of the UDHR. And actually, the preamble is very, very important because it's like the mission statement of the UDHR. We also focus on what you might call the ideal scene rather than the problem. So we give people something fundamental that they can all agree on, which actually represents what you might call the ideal scene for their particular issue and all the other issues, so they can actually join forces and say, this is what we want to achieve. United by their new understanding of their human rights and their awareness of how they can now interact socially in a way that benefits them and the others with whom they're in contact, they create a force for individual and institutional change in the direction of a liberal and democratic society. So, what the councillor was saying about barriers, I would answer that by saying, do something different. In your council schools, start teaching the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Pilot it. See what happens. See whether it reduces the interest of some young people in extremist views. See if it does something about racist bullying. See if it does something about Islamophobia. I think you will be pleasantly surprised. So, in a UK context, there are groups that we regard as target publics. So, young people vulnerable to gang activity and gun and knife crime, we have actually piloted this, and we have reduced violence, we have ended off gang warfare with human rights education. Vulnerable young men and girls who could be at risk of sexual exploitation and trafficking. If the girls in the north of England who got into such difficulty had properly contextualised human rights education, it is very likely that they would have not got into the difficulty that they got into. And young girls from a cultural background where early and forced marriage, so-called honour killing, and female genital mutilation, which are all horrific violations of human rights, in my understanding, are prevalent or still occurring. And anyone experiencing domestic abuse is a violation of human rights, whether physical or emotional or three things. For democracy to take root and flourish, people need to have a democratic mindset as individuals in order to be able to maintain a stable, consistently civil, peaceful, democratic government. In countries where our 5 languages are, well, 5 languages on the Peaceful Planet website, the Youth for Human Rights website has, I think, 17 languages, mostly European, but also Hebrew, because I guess human rights are an issue there as well, and Chinese. My impression is that this is not always the case, and I should add that human rights education is certainly also vital in Western countries to curb or eliminate a variety of social ills. I've mentioned Islamophobia and racist bullying. Human rights education is about more than advocacy and taking governments to task for their human rights record. It's also, as I've said before, how we as individuals treat other individuals. Men and women, parents and children, teachers and students, employers and employees, and so on. Now, our intentions with the training are to equip participants with a working knowledge of the preamble and articles of UDHR, to give them something fundamental they can agree on, which represents the ideal scene for their issue, interact socially in a way that benefits them and the others with whom they're in contact. They create I've actually covered this bit, haven't I? I do apologise. So this is what we are doing.
Just maybe wind up shortly.
I'm on the point of doing so.
Excellent. Thank you.
All I would like to say is we have proved that it is possible to do this. Thank you very much.
Oh, no. Thank you very much. I think bringing us back to the actual key point of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is very important. So thank you so much. I'm now going to ask Zubair.
Chair, Professor Nzito, Barrister Abdul Majid Trambu, distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon to you. I'm grateful for providing me the opportunity to address this August gathering full of energy. And as is implicit in the topic today, ladies and gentlemen, its use as a device to making peaceful resolution of conflicts possible. I'm humbled by the breadth of the topic, making peaceful resolution of conflicts around the world possible. An aspiring, visionary, and futuristic theme that we all must and have today contributed to our interventions. I must say that was very effective. All of you have already contributed, and I may not be as much, but a different view. Today, ladies and gentlemen, merely 70 years after the human rights movement was born out of the disasters of the Second World War, human rights ideals inform both the practice and theory of international law and politics. You heard the political solutions and resolutions, and also I'm going to be looking at some legalistic. I think Adnan has already contributed a lot towards what the legal framework is. Just to dwell on that although the frailties of human rights